I'm very curious. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you can answer this, but what's the coordination like between your campaign with, let's say, the state Democratic Party? Is there any discussions with them? Are they secretly telling you, we need you to do the following? Like, what? Or are they ignoring you entirely? Which I don't know if that would make me feel better, or like, no, they have a total grasp on you and they tell you how to do things. I don't know which one of those is better, where you lie, somewhere in the middle of that spectrum somewhere.
I mean, I guess the official answer is that we do have some apparatus with like party politics where, they say that we'll be watching, we're more hands off at this point. Please, make sure that you're using, you're working with, staff who we think are going to uphold our democratic values. They do that. But of course, like anything in politics, it gets a lot more messy, a lot more quickly, which I think is actually just adding to my levels of my whys for why I'm running, is because I've been involved enough in, local and state in the state and local political process to know that we as Democrats do a really good job, and especially for more vulnerable communities, and not just rural, but of course, people of color and trans people and you name it, where we say we really want these votes. We really want your votes. And then we kind of, that's often the first, communities to be sacrificed on the altar of compromise. And I guess the more I run, the more I see that up close and personal. And it both really saddens me, but it also continues to make me more fiery and more committed to running to win, and also to tell these stories. So, I mean, maybe that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time, or maybe more local people want to get into the weeds more on that exactly. But I can at least say that for all the reasons that often people get disgusted and end up leaving the process, I at least I can say I empathize with it greatly. Like, I feel that. And to me, that's why I'm running, is I'm tired of feeling that way. And I feel like, again, this is our one life. And if the planet's on fire, let's do what we can to really make things better.
How can you make a case? This is stepping outside your personal campaign, but how do you make a case to people for why they need to vote for Biden as the Democratic nominee come November, no matter what the issues are with him? Because it seems like the Democratic Party, by and large, is not making that case very strongly right now. What would you be telling voters who are saying, okay, I like you, but I'm not sure about the guy at the top of the ticket?
Those feelings are valid. This is actually a really good follow-up to where I think I was trying to get at earlier, actually, which is that I'm actually personally sad right now, that I feel like a lot of, in the interest of just winning the election and thinking of these short-term gains, we are really missing the mark that I think would actually better create short-term gains by not addressing the very real concerns that people have. Like, I think I said in my personal capacity, but like, no amount of dark brand and memes are going to convince me that, the economy is truly working for all of us when we see rising income inequality. Like, I'm a millennial, and I think I heard in a panel recently in the Capitol that, millennials, two-thirds of millennials don't have savings for retirement. And I say, my original retirement plan was to be pushed out into an ice floe, but with climate change, I won't even have that. So, I jest a little bit, but to that point, when I think about Biden, yeah, I'm voting for Biden when it's Biden versus Trump. There's no question about that. But locally, I think this will be of real interest, is locally in Washington state, our primaries on March 12th, there's been a local push for voting uncommitted on the ballot. So how it works in Washington state is you have to just first declare, are you a Republican or Democrat? Like, you just have to check that box. And then after that, you can say, okay, so now that you've said you're a Democrat or a Republican, vote on only the party you said. So you have to say I'm a Democrat, and then you say, so because I'm a Democrat, here's how I'm voting. And now there's a push, and especially because both local labor unions and, people who really want Biden to do more, to really stand up to, the atrocities that are being committed in Gaza, to say we want to put Biden on notice. So there's been a campaign recently for bubbling in uncommitted. And at least for me, I'll just disclose that's part of that. That is what I did, not because I won't vote for Biden, but because I really believe in know better, do better. And I'm a really big believer in primaries where we can generate authentic conversation. Like that's for my race, but I really mean that in general. So for me, I'm saying, look, we actually have serious concerns about inaction on, look, I recognize that Biden has inherited the worst disaster ever. And that, we also have like the absolute worst Speaker of the House we could ever have. And for me, that vote is less on Biden and more on telling the Democratic Party that we need to stop ignoring the very real pain that people have to pretend it's okay for, I would posit that the base that's least impacted by the pain of where that inaction is still happening. I hope that makes sense. But to me, I think that it's, so again,
You
vote for
can send a
Biden.
message now.
Send a message. Send a message that says and for me, that's saying, yeah, I'll still vote for you. In the meantime, just know that's not a blank check. And I don't like the idea of thinking just because I'm a Democrat, you can get away with things. Like, I really think that accountability is for all of us. And for me, especially when I've seen a lot of hurt happening from inside the party and a lot of the same things we would not have accepted if it were Republicans, say, okay, since you don't think it's good to be exclusionary or be dismissive of people living in poverty or, people who are trans, why would we accept that in our own party? So that's where I'm at, because I just really want to make sure that we are having that dialogue so that we don't keep repeating the short-term gains.
This is a side question, but you alluded to the fact that a lot of the reason you're motivated to run and you're working so hard to make these changes happen is because of your humanist values, that this is the only life we have. I'm wondering, how do you reconcile the small, but they exist, group of people who say they are atheists, they are humanists, well, they're atheists, but they want to vote for Republicans for whatever the issue is that they care about. And listen, I've tried to do this on my own. I cannot make sense of it, but I'm wondering if you have any idea for how they reconcile those two worlds.
I can't say I always do myself either. I think this is where a lot of us more progressive atheists often find greater solidarity within the faith community that at least shares our shared values, especially on income inequality and on human rights and the environment and all those things that are always interconnected anyway. Because I will say, I feel like sometimes where I'm sure you would agree that it can often feel like herding cats with Democrats, and then it's like really herding feral cats when it comes to the progressive atheist movement. So then you have a few more barn cats that are, the more conservative atheists. And I will say that when I've talked with some of them, I found
damn independent thinkers doing their
right.
own thing.
I know. See, I was raised I was raised Lutheran, and I think that's really interesting. I went to a Lutheran school that's all about challenging authority and critical thinking. So congratulations, good job, PLU. Yeah. It's like, but yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of independent thinking. I do think that and again, I'm really big on calling in our own. That's going into my vote on the uncommitted. That comes into the secular movement, where I get sad, and I do speak to when I hear, for example, Islamophobic comments coming from inside the house. Like, we don't do that. We don't put down other communities, and especially historically and currently marginalized communities, to make a statement. Like, we just don't do that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I have a hard time reconciling that as well. But then that's where maybe it's how I just quickly try to resolve my cognitive dissonance. But I'm just like, but you know what? You still deserve to have a good quality of life, even if you have some thinking to do.
Sure. One thing I wanted to make sure we talk about is, what concerns do you have about public education right now in your state? What are the biggest issues facing public education? Because again, it's Washington. I would think that's a blue state. They're relatively good on this. I would hope they're good on the side of teachers and teacher unions and not banning books and doing all that crazy stuff. But what are the big issues you are worried about in Washington?
The fact that that's actually all still really relevant in Washington. And that's, I think, the biggest issue. And especially if you're in a safe blue spot of the state, and I would even go so far as to say a safe blue spot in my legislative district. Again, that feels really abstract, but that's happening in the here and now. So I alluded to earlier that, it's actually been dangerous, even locally, with school board elections. And I guess I'll just go as far as to say that I had one of the other Democrats in the race for this election actually said that, I shouldn't be running because, for example, our school board elections turned out well. And I said, well, first off, we just avoided disaster, and that's because we worked our butts off. But it's also because, I don't know if we call it well, because we still have Moms for Liberty, and we still had people who risked their lives to support candidates or to be candidates, just running to make sure that, we don't ban books, or that we don't, or that we do want to teach factual history. But people were actually, risking their safety to do this, even out in my neighborhoods. And I can't emphasize enough that I almost think because of this kind of impasse we're at, people feel both emboldened and desperate in areas like mine, because they're that close to being able to achieve things, but they're not. And that creates that level where it just gets even more violent and scary. So I've actually had to go to local school boards and speak, both either in my personal capacity or saying, hey, I'm also on the city council, to say, don't ban this book, because that was happening even in Democratic majority school boards. And also, most recently, there was an attempt to remove a land acknowledgement, despite huge protests from members of the tribe saying, for example, if you think it's performative and that's your excuse, maybe make it less performative. So there are huge inroads to make even locally. And again, that's why I say get involved locally, because we had a race where it became a Moms for Liberty versus Moms for Liberty race out where I am. And that's had repercussions that included trying to remove a land acknowledgement just because. But more statewide, because I think that's really getting to your question. And I think that's actually addressing, though, my frustrations with even some of the Democratic apparatus, where we have this conversation going along saying, well, you shouldn't run, and I'm more of the preferred candidate because your issues don't matter, really hurts, right? And that's actually having that impact at the state level. So I left teaching, and I was really dismayed to hear that, at least at the time that that this survey came out, that education, like Washington State was supposed to be the number one place to be a teacher. And I was like, well, if this is the best our country can do, I'm not sure if this is okay. And I say this because this is the main policy issue to really get at too, is despite the progressive veneer with Washington State, for example, our tax code is ass backwards. Like, we were 50th in the nation for tax fairness. Like, in other words, disproportionately, we don't have an income tax. So think of all the wealthy businesses, people who live in Washington State, they're not getting taxed on their income. And there's a huge fight right now locally on capital gains. All of this matters because it comes to education funding. So Florida actually edged us out, though, because Florida man makes for bad tax policy. So now we're 49th. All of this is important because we're continuously kicking the can down the road on public education. So this session alone, for example, our Washington State legislature failed to pass a bill to reduce or eliminate school lunch debt. It took a huge struggle just to give para educators a raise to make sure they weren't living in poverty. I would also speak to the fact that we put a lot of onus on all these additional trainings for teachers, including DEI, which is all great and wonderful. And if you're not funding systems equitably, and if you're not creating equitable communities for learning environments, it feels like victim blaming to say, well, teachers just need to, do this and that and get more training, when the issue isn't only on the teachers. I would also say we need to do more focus on admin programs and trainings. So that's a little bit also. Overall, it's a funding issue. Like, we just continuously deprioritize public education spending, and we rely on property taxes. This goes to my concerns with rural communities. So we rely so heavily on property taxes to fund our schools that people do have valid concerns to say, I am on a fixed income and I can't pay this. What are we going to do? So we have bonds and levies that continuously fail in our districts. Almost every district that is represented in my community, because we have 4 districts, have had a bond or levy fail recently. And that's scary. So I think that's answering the question, but it's funding, but it's also about the fact that because I'm a former public school teacher, and before that I worked in a high school counseling office, that I'm seeing where we're getting it wrong as policymakers and really not listening to professionals. And when it matters to listen to teachers, is that actually creates better learning outcomes. Like, trust the professionals like you would in any other profession.